Welcome to Because the Beatles, the podcast about the Beatles, everything about the Beatles 24/8. I'm Erica.
And I'm Allison. And before we start, be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, or stream us on Spotify. And if you're enjoying BC the Beatles, feel free to leave us a preferably 5-star review so other Beatle maniacs can find us.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X, TikTok, and YouTube. We'll be posting videos, photos, and more from this episode and beyond. And you can also email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com. And welcome back to part 2 of our Mind Games extravaganza. Today we'll be going track by track on the Mind Games Ultimate Mix. But first, don't forget to enter our giveaway to win your own copy of the Mind Games 6-album set. Just go to bcthebeatles.com, click on the monthly giveaway link on the left side of the homepage, and enter anytime before August 12th.
Let's dig into the track by track. We have a monster-ass track to kick everything off, which is the title track, which is Mind Games. If you know one song from the album, it's going to be this one. It's been included on so many John Lennon Greatest Hits comps, a lot of other compilations. To me, the Ultimate Mix here is really dimensional. Each instrument sort of has its time to shine, but I also think the Elemental Mix is kind of the superstar of the entire box. It distills down to John's vocal, the killer bass line. Again, I'm so obsessed with the bass on this. It's crazy. The organ, the tambourine, and electric guitar. And it has a really cool reggae feel, which gave me Paul in the 70s vibes. I hate to say.
Yeah, it's better than Sea Moon, though.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, that's the bar is too low, though, Erica.
I know.
The bar is too low.
The bar is very low there. But as far as the song Mind Games goes, I think that the new mix demonstrates how this song should be elevated to a Lennon classic. It is fantastic. It's got all of the signature elements of John's style. It's got one of his best vocals. It's got a soaring melody. The lyrics are interesting, but a little weird, but not too off the wall. And the message of peace is accessible without being either aggressively political or too pedantic. So I hope what comes out of this is that the song Mind Games becomes elevated, more to the level of the song Imagine. And maybe the whole album might not be up there with the Imagine album or with Plastic Ono Band, but the song itself should definitely rate that high.
Yeah, it's so good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love the mixes, obviously, on this set, but this one and a few others, I don't know, they remind me a lot of the song God, which I know was recorded, it was an earlier John song.
Yeah.
The sort of piano-y bass mixes here of Mind Games definitely gave me those vibes. And Take 7 outtake here, which is on the last sort of reading of the album, definitely is very God-like. And that's not a bad thing. I think God is beautiful. It's got a beautiful arrangement. Mm-hmm. So that kind of bolstered the song, if anything.
I was especially blown away by the Elements mix of this song, which is the version that features no more than 3 instruments at a time and no lead vocals. The element they brought most forward here is the organ, which is an unusual choice, but all of a sudden it sounds like something you'd hear in church or as a wedding processional.
Ooh.
And it was just so different, shockingly different, and so unexpectedly good. It brought out a whole new side to the song.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta mention, too, that this song is a standout in Dolby Atmos.
Oh, man, I bet. I'm so jealous you got to hear that in the Atmos room. It's funny the organ is really the standout instrument on there, too, because it's I don't think about organ when I think about Mind Games.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But it really creates the vibe for the whole thing. So I see why they brought it out, particularly here when you don't really hear that instrument in a lot of other places.
Yeah, exactly. In the second spot, we have Tight Ass, Tight A $, which is my new rap name, by the way.
I love it. Burlesque name and rap name.
Yeah, I know. So this track, John, we're going to hear a lot from John today, and he's going to be real negative. Let me just preface this. But he called it a throwaway track, but it was basically a way to get Tight Ass, quote unquote, past the censors. Of course, the lyrics of this also reference sex and drugs in playful ways. John also called the sound of this a Tex-Mex sound, which was very much in vogue. That was becoming in vogue in 1973. And people have compared this to people like Doug Somm. Doug Somm was in the Sir Douglas Quintet and had a very prolific country rock career as well. And I can definitely hear that. If you haven't heard his stuff, go listen to it. And it'll definitely draw a line between Tight Ass and Doug Somm, which is very funny. I can't not laugh when I say the title because it's just, I can see John being a cheeky little bastard and being like, we're going to call it Tight A $sign and have all these lyrics that are sort of like double entendres.
Does Kesha know about this? Does she know that she was not the first?
Oh my God. she was not the first. Yes. Somebody call up Kesha and let her know that the $sign was not her doing. But yeah, so in the style of this song also is very much in the vein of the music of John's youth. So very Elvis-y. It kind of reminds me of That's All Right Mama.
Yeah, totally.
In that kind of style. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in fact, the outtake here, which is take 2, John says, quote, "We ain't got past 1959."
I love
so that kind of tracks. I know, that kind of tracks. And then later, John would write a letter to Waylon Jennings and telling him he should record this song, which I think that would have been amazing. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a little sad that didn't happen.
I know. And I also have to say, not to mention Paul on every track, but for this one, it's just so similar to what Paul was getting at in the song Hi, Hi, Hi from a year before, 1972. Trying to get past censors and talk about sex and drugs without really talking about sex and drugs.
Body gun. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sweet banana.
Banana. I mean, yeah, we can't even get into Hi, Hi, Hi right now. That's just too much. The Elements mix here, I think, was really great because it highlighted that really badass guitar solo from David Spinoza.
He's outstanding.
Yeah, he really, really rocks it.
I still can't stop thinking about what he said, though, in May Pang's documentary. I'll leave it to the listeners to go watch that and see some of his interviews there to see what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's a whole lot about David Spinoza that we're not going to unpack here, but if you dig in a little bit on like May Pang stuff, she spills the tea.
And it's very interesting knowing the wider context around what's going on at the time.
Very interesting. The context of this whole album in that alternate universe of May Pang is very fascinating. In third position here is the very beautiful I Sin, I'm Sorry. And obviously, this is the first appearance we have of a John and Yoko song. And it's pretty much directly a sort of like repentant song regarding the state of John and Yoko's marriage at the time. It's very pleading. It's very melancholy. I Sin literally means I'm sorry, but it's also, to me, it sounds a lot like he's saying, I see my sin, which I don't know if that was intentional. I mean, obviously, he's using the Japanese version of I'm sorry. But it's kind of maybe a happy accident. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. But he certainly did sin in Yoko's eyes around this time, which was so much of the catalyst for what eventually happened with Yoko and John and with May.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like John is the proverbial dog with tail between his legs here. And he definitely plays the victim a bit with lyrics like, all I know is what you tell me. All I know is what you show me. And obviously sort of like begging Yoko and creating that sort of dynamic between them. And it's really personal. It gets really personal because John calls her by her name throughout the song. So it's not in the same vein as like an Oh Yoko or a Dear Yoko, but it's sort of just like, again, like that pleading, like, Asimasen Yoko,
Yeah.
He had a lot of those confessional songs. Yeah. I mean, he had a lot of those confessional songs. It's interesting that in the next album, May actually calls John's name in a song.
Yes, that is true. That is very interesting.
So weird. Not to mention Paul again, but
oh my God.
in the lyrics and in the vibe, didn't it sound a lot like Oh Darling? Especially in some of the outtakes, the raw versions.
I didn't get that, but I can see how you would get that.
But it makes sense because John always wanted to sing Oh Darling. And he said publicly more than once that he didn't think Paul sang that song too well. And that he would have sung it better.
Oh my God. I love that John simultaneously hates his voice, but wants to sing the most like tear my fucking vocal cords up song that like the Beatles ever did.
I know.
Maybe besides like Helter Skelter, but like Oh Darlin' is definitely like an operatic aria, you know?
And he wasn't saying this like in 1971 when he was especially pissed off at Paul. Or maybe he was, but he said this as late as the Playboy interview in 1980.
Oh my God. He was obsessed. He should have just done it. Maybe someday a tape will surface of like him doing Oh Darling in his like kitchen or something.
Oh my God, that'd be so funny.
More than any song in this album, I think this one really demonstrates the rockiness of his marriage at the time and his segue into his affair with May Pang and their separation. Something else I thought was really interesting about this song is that there's another Japanese word used in the lyrics, which is senpaku. John sings, you know, when I'm down, real senpaku. And in the book, there's an interview with George Osawa, who wrote a book called You Are All Senpaku. And what senpaku is literally refers to the eye. So the iris with white on either side of the iris and then below the iris.
What?
Yeah, which I've always heard, like George references John F. Kennedy. I've heard it referenced with like Ted Bundy and like serial killers, like they all have like the Sampaku eyes. Because most people have no white above or below the iris. It's sort of like the iris takes up the whole middle of the eye. But if you have white underneath the iris, it's like it's supposed to be like symbolic of something. Like George Osawa talks about how like it could mean tragedy or unpeacefulness, you know, that kind of thing.
I'm having trouble visualizing this. I guess it's like almost like a googly eye or something.
Look up a picture of Brian Koberger, the murderer of the Idaho students, because he has senpaku eyes.
Oh, okay.
So it's just the white underneath.
So it's like an embodiment of like insanity almost.
Yeah, that's kind of like what it's purported to mean. Yeah. And, you know, George Osawa, he sort of had a hidden agenda with his You Are All Senpaku because his solution to it was macrobiotics,
Yes.
which obviously John and Yoko were super into. You know, Osawa said, You are all more or less senpaku. You must heal yourself before attending to anything else. And yeah, his preferred route to that was macrobiotics.
I tried a macrobiotic diet once.
Did you really? How'd it go?
I mean, I'd never been skinnier, and that's not a good thing.
It's just like rice, right?
It's a lot of seaweed and miso and bok choy and stuff like that, or at least it was when I did it. Yeah, but I mean, it was hard. It was hard for me. Like, I couldn't find enough calories, I guess. I don't know. I couldn't do it for long.
Yeah, well, it's hard to get calories from that kind of stuff. There's like an illustration in this song's part of the book where John draws a a picture of himself and Yoko, and he's like, I was a vegetarian, I was so slow, and he's drawing little cartoon figures of them, and then he's like, then I went macrobiotic and now I'm fast, and like, thank you, George, hi George, like all this stuff.
You're fast because you eat so little, you're practically weightless.
I know exactly that makes sense. Like a lot of us, like many of us, John was a lifelong struggler with body dysmorphia and hashtag relatable.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I can definitely see him wanting to try, the different things to see what would happen. And
Yeah.
definitely macrobiotics was a big part of their life for a long time. So, yeah, I thought that was cool. I had never heard that word before. So now we all learned a little bit about Snapaku. Here, I think the evolution mix is probably the most fascinating of the bunch because you can hear John switch his take on this tune from I'll Ease Your Pain, which becomes Asumasen. And he says, I'll ease your pain. All you have to do is call my name, which then switches around to make John the recipient of Yoko's strength, where with those lines, he was sort of the provider,
Yeah.
but the finished product is he is looking to Yoko for that strength. I'd like to know, what exactly made him change that, if it was like a conscious choice.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting analysis. And to clarify which album we're talking about, this is the version that has the mini audio documentary of each song going from demo to final. There's so many e-names.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you think about it, as he was getting further and further into the recording process, he was getting further and further away from Yoko. But at the same time, his lyrics were saying something else.
Yeah.
Maybe that is what Sean was talking about when he felt like there was always that core of love and devotion between them, no matter what was going on.
For sure, because if you take these songs at face value, you get that from them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't know anything else that's going on at the time, it's like he is so in love with her and he just wants her back and he's so sorry, you know, and
Yeah.
all that. But,
Yeah.
you know, knowing it in the context of history, it's a little bit different. But, you know, it's still, yeah. And especially after talking to May and then coming to this album, you know, it was fascinating to me to sort of put all those pieces together and be like, okay, how did this work? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with a song like this one.
And it's funny because since I learned these songs out of context of the albums and just heard them mostly from a playlist, I always placed this a little bit later in John's career.
That's so fascinating. I could get that sense from it too.
For a lot of the songs on this album, I went into this thinking they were actually from a different era, just based on how they felt to me.
Wow. That's cool. It's cool now that you're like seeing them in the context.
But yeah, it gives the songs more meaning now that I can place them more accurately in John's timeline.
Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure. For sure. And I thought also the outtake of this one too, which is take two, is a much more bluesy reading of the song. And that really lends itself well to the lyrics because it could be a blues if you wanted to be. I thought that was really, really
Hmm.
cool. Yeah.
You really hear the influence of his teenage years coming through a lot of this record. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Him more than maybe any of the other Beatles, although they all had their moments for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he loved it.
So next up, One Day at a Time.
Yeah. And, you know, this was something that John called a concept of life, which is very, very true, you know, one day at a time. We have lots of metaphors here, you know, comparing his relationship to Yoko as two halves of a whole. And it's a motif that John definitely harkened back to frequently in his solo career. We hear that all the time.
Hmm.
This is a song, too, that's very unique because we have John singing falsetto the whole time. And according to John, it was Yoko's idea for him to sing it in falsetto. In the Evolution documentary, you know, John starts singing it in his normal range, and you hear him sing it in his normal range for many of the takes. You know, the outtake here is take 18. So that kind of shows you how long he sang it in his normal range before he switched over to the falsetto.
Yeah. I thought the evolution of this song, no pun intended, but the way that you hear him use his normal range on earlier versions and then switch to a falsetto in the later ones, it highlights how the falsetto and that light tone really made the song. Hearing the other outtakes in the earlier versions, to me, it almost sounded like something that he could have been writing for Ringo for Sentimental Journey. It sounded a little more lounge lizardy, a style that suits Ringo so much better than John.
Oh, interesting.
And then as soon as he brings it up an octave, it takes on a very characteristic John sound.
Yeah.
And now it's a John song, and it could never be a Ringo song.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so funny. As we talked about in our Ringo episode, he could have been the king of the lounge lizards in another dimension.
He still could be. He still could be. Never too late.
It still can happen for him. It still can. I think he should do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Vegas residency for Ringo 2024. Let's do it.
Oh my God, please. You know, now that love is gone, there's a vacuum there that needs to be filled by a Beatle.
Oh my God. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, I can totally hear that. Like the normal range version of this being suitable for Ringo. I think one of my favorite things about this was the elemental mix. And the elemental mix in a lot of these tracks is really, really good for showcasing the beautiful backing vocals from Something Different, the girl group. And they provided the background choruses on the whole album. So I want to give them a shout out. And Something Different were Christine Wilshire, Jocelyn Brown, Angel Coakley, and Kathy Mull. And actually, in the book, you know, they give each member of the classic UFO band their own little spotlight and their own little section, and they give Something Different their section as well. And so Christine and Jocelyn sort of give an oral history of the group, you know, the Mind Games book. And one part of the story that I found particularly entertaining is when Christine's sort of talking about being in the studio and they're all ordering out for food and they're getting burgers and fries and that kind of thing. And Yoko's ordering sushi. And Christine's like, I have never had sushi. I'm a little scared to try it. but Yoko sort of insisted. And so she tried it. And now she's like, thank God for Yoko, because I love sushi.
Trendsetter.
I know, right? So good. But yeah, so I was just so impressed by the backing vocals, and you get to hear them too on a lot of the Evolution documentaries where they sort of break down their arrangements and when they come in and that kind of thing too. Yeah, the Elemental mix really stood out to me.
It's interesting to hear the contrast with and without the backing vocals. When you hear it without the vocals, you miss it and notice
Yeah,
how much they contribute to the song.
totally.
And this is another one where I think because of the falsetto, I always assumed the song was recorded closer to the double fantasy era and not 1973 at all.
Oh, not so early. Yeah.
And maybe that's why I think it sounds like John, because I'm thinking about how John solidified this particular sound at the end of his life.
Mm,
You know, he used that falsetto tone or at least a lighter vocal quite often, like on Beautiful Boy, for example.
yeah, that's true.
It's not all falsetto, but it's very light, you know?
Yeah, I can see that. That is cool. Yeah, I could see him like sort of interpreting this in different parts of his life for sure. Well, next is one of my favorite tracks of Mind Games. I think it might be my favorite song on Mind Games.
Really?
I don't know. I just really love it. Okay, it's before we get into it, it's Bring On the Lucy, Free to People. And immediately it reminded me of like a George song from All Things Must Pass
Mhm.
because the arrangement feels really lush.
Uh-huh.
And I think also because of that pedal steel, Sneaky Pete over here with, his pedal steel. I think that sounds really, it makes it sound really, really vibrant.
Yeah.
And I just love the sound of this. And it's so like such a kind of a party vibe without being too raucous.
Mhm.
And I think that really complements the message here, which is, we see John return briefly to his political leanings. The song it sort of had its roots in 1971. So that kind of aligns with where he was in his head at that point.
I love it that we have such different feelings on this one.
Oh, okay.
This was one of my least favorite on the album. And not because I think it's a bad song, but because it felt out of date to me. And when I looked into it deeper and saw that this was the other song in the album that was written a bit earlier, it felt more like that. Like it felt like the same general time when he was doing Give Peace a Chance or even John Sinclair song,
Okay.
And maybe it's like the chorus of people and kind of the repetitive peace anthem sort of feel of it. I certainly don't hate it, but it felt like it stuck out.
Yeah, there are a couple of moments I feel like on this album that do stick out a bit. Like this one, I feel like Meat City also sticks out,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of makes sense because I sort of feel like they both could belong back on Imagine or Plastic Ono Band or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe because I love that period of John's solo career, so I was like, oh, good. Like it was sort of felt like home territory.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah.
It was comfortable for me. Also, I loved his allusion to the devil with 666, which probably, was an allusion to Nixon, and following it with the line, while you're jerking off each other. Fucking sassy John.
Wow. Beat the Beatles indeed.
I know. There we go. The best post headline of all time.
Ever.
So good. So good. Also on the Elements mix here, just another glorious showcase of something different. Actually, both the Elemental mix and the Elements mix, where it's just their vocals with bass and bongo, which is so cool. Because I mean, this is one of the tracks where they're really, really prominent, on the entire song.
This is one of the biggest sounding songs in the album.
For sure.
It was closer to the wall of sound than anything else on the album. And if you hear it in Atmos, it almost blows your eardrums out. So good.
Oh my God, I bet. It reminds me almost like like a parade song. Like you could see him like marching down the street, like singing this song or something,
Yeah.
It's just got that bigness about it.
Yeah. It makes me think back to the movie Across the Universe, even though that was Beatles period, but there was like a moment in that movie where they were at a anti-war protest. And this song, if they had added beyond like the Beatles time period, would have fit so well right there.
Oh, totally. Totally.
So next up, this song fucking slaps in Atmos, the Utopian National Anthem.
It's such a bop. Oh my God. The song is like, it rocks harder than it rocks your fucking face off. Oh my God. Well, I will say it is 3 seconds of silence, but they add an extra second on this set. So we got 4 seconds of silence, people.
Oh, extra long jam.
Fuck yeah. Like, come on. This must have slapped when they played it live.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
I mean, considering it's silent, we don't really have much to break down, but and if you want to know more about Newtopia, listen to our Newtopia episode from earlier this year. But I guess if you don't know what Newtopia is, which that's okay, we'll give you a too long didn't read version. It was, or still is, a conceptual country declared by John and Yoko at a press conference on April 2nd, 1973, at the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, in a reaction to John's ongoing legal and immigration troubles. And so this box includes John and Yoko's declaration of Newtopia, as well as your own Newtopian ID card, as Erica said. And also the outtake here is John actually reading the Declaration of Newtopia at that press conference in April 1973, so you can hear it. But the declaration reads, "We announce the birth of a conceptual country, Newtopia. Citizenship of the country can be obtained by declaration of your awareness of Newtopia. Newtopia has no land, no boundaries, no passports, only people. Newtopia has no laws other than cosmic. All people of Newtopia are ambassadors of the country. As two ambassadors of Newtopia, we ask for diplomatic immunity and recognition in the United Nations of our country and our people." And its flag was a simple white tissue, and its seal was a seal. Typical John humor.
I believe that if you get the big, super, super deluxe version, you get some of those items as part of the Newtopia package.
Oh yes, you get a flag. You get your own tissue flag.
And I love it that the outtake here, they actually did put thought into this, and it's different. Like this track is different on one of these 6 albums, and this track actually is a track on every single one of them.
I know. I was so surprised. When I listened to each of the different albums, I was like, surely they would just, skip right over the little baby Newtopian national anthem. But no, it's there. It's there. I just love the remix of that silence, man. Sounds better than ever. It's just more silent, Okay, moving on to an actual song. Next is Intuition. And Erica, I think you have some thoughts on this song, right?
John's got some explaining to do on this one. He owes Paul a fucking apology.
This is one of the ones where we were listening to the Ultimate Mix for the first time and sort of texting each other. And Erica's like, fucking Intuition, man. It is like some granny shit right there.
It is. I have never heard any output from John that is more granny music than this song. And not only is it granny music, it's granny music with a piano beat that's basically Good Day Sunshine.
Oh my God. I didn't even think about that.
I mean, it's like an ode to Paul, and I don't understand it. I love it, but yeah.
That is so funny. It's true. It very much is. It does give that Paul vibe for sure. And, the theme too is very Paulish in a way, because this is in direct contradiction to a lot of what John has done throughout his solo career, which is like self-doubt, very not self-assured, like not very trusting with himself. So this is the absolute opposite, especially of Asuma Sen earlier in the album. This is the contradiction. So he is very self-assured, very trusting of himself. My instincts are fine. It's good to be alive. It's still got that depth of spirituality and introspection, that he's known for, and that he's referring to his own intuition.
Yeah, but it's still very Paul.
I'm not doubting that. I'm not contradicting that at all. I'm not going to take the Paulness away from this, because it is very Paul. Like, the optimism is very Paul. That's for sure. I'm sure when Paul heard this, he's like, what the fuck?
Yeah. I wonder if he thought it was a troll at first in the spirit of How Do You Sleep? But he's not. It feels very sincere.
Yeah. Well, and we will come to a Paul moment maybe more directly later in the album.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. You just wait.
I'm excited. I don't think I picked it up.
Oh my God, I'm so excited for you. Yeah, I mean, beyond the Paulness of this, I really liked in the Evolution documentary of this track, you can hear it evolve from a more somber demo, which is so different from what it actually became in its, final bouncier and sort of funkier form. Even the outtake, which is take 12, is a bit more mysterious sounding than the final product.
That's funny, because isn't that a lot of the way with John? Like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, like the I Am the Greatest demo, his first demo was very melancholy and, was clearly a satire. And then you think about Yellow Submarine, the first demo that we heard a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Like he kind of starts things like that. And as he kind of builds out something different. But his first instinct, I guess, is that more melancholy.
Yeah, it's a lot of times that way.
I got to call out the elements mix, though, in this one. It's mostly guitar and Gordon's super funky walking bass line.
Oh, love it.
So cool.
I'm like #1 Gordon fan right here.
Oh my God.
Love it. So good.
Now we move on to one of the highlights, I thought, Out of the Blue.
It is so good. This is actually one of the more rave reviews John would give his tracks from this album. And this is all him talking to David Schiff in 1980 for Playboy. And he said about the Blue, it's just a love song, nothing special.
Oh,
he didn't think much of this album, but I think he is his own worst enemy here because I don't agree with him, especially here. I think it's another John Loves Yoko song that's a powerhouse, like kind of like Dear Yoko and Oh Yoko. I think Out the Blue is really kind of belongs in that canon.
when I first heard it in Atmos, especially, I could not believe that this was not a standard wedding first dance song.
Oh my God, totally. Yes.
It's perfect for that. It sounds so good. And why the hell did Elton John never record it?
Oh, that's a good call.
It's got such incredible Elton John vibes, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, again, it has the two halves, one whole motif and has Yoko's John's rescuer, you know, from Darkness and Misery, where he says, I was born just to get to you. But it's very funny because the timing has it as recorded sort of after John and Yoko had already split and he was with May Pang. And on the Evolution mix, you can actually hear Yoko break in saying the bass is slipping, but that kind of makes me wonder if that was spliced in from another session. It's not beyond comprehension that she would have been in the studio that day. It's possible.
I don't know. I mean, that relationship was so complex. She was calling him every day.
That's true.
Even when he was in LA. Like, it was not your normal breakup.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, she could have been there. She could have been sort of like backseat driving the sessions, or, you know, John was producing, but who knows? Like, and she does break in from time to time on these Evolution mixes. But I don't know. It brings a different dynamic to it. Thinking about they had already split, you know, when he's recording these vocals of this beautiful love song. And then she sort of has this comment of the bass slipping, which, by the way, Yoko, back off Gordon. But, you know,
Well, yeah.
I'll let that ride.
I would feel very uncomfortable if I was John and I had just been kicked out of my house and my wife who kicked me out was in the session where I was recording a song that was a love song to her that I wrote before I split up with her and she was peeking it. That would be really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and John doesn't really even acknowledge her comment. He just sort of moves on. Again, this is like if we're reading it as it happened and it's not like sort of spliced or, you know, edited, which it could be because it is sort of, you know, a time lapse.
Well, the Evolution documentary is spliced in, so it could have been very early. Who knows? I mean, that's the thing about an audio documentary. You don't really have like title cards or anything to tell you when these things really happened.
Right, exactly. I mean, for that, you know, you can reference the book, but yeah, I mean, just listening to it and knowing the context, it kind of takes it to a different level. But I love Out the Blue. I think this is a great song.
Next up, Only People.
It's a certified bop, TBH.
That reminded me of some of the poppier music Paul was doing at the time.
Of course it fucking did. Of course it. How would it not?
It's the lens through which I see everything, even this album.
Oh, well, so the kernel of this song stems from Johnny Yoko's co-hosting stint on the Mike Douglas show in January of 1972. And during an episode on which Chuck Berry was a guest, I'm sure John was very excited about that. He made the statement, quote, only people can save the world, when he was talking about the song Imagine. And then Yoko sort of reworked that sentiment into, quote, only people can change the world, which was included on the record's inner sleeve originally. In John's normal self-deprecating way, intuition be damned, he called the song a, quote, failure. He said it was a good lick, but I can never get the words to make sense.
Do they really not make sense?
There's a couple of lines that are kind of phoned in. I think there's something that's like about eating your cake or that kind of thing. But I think in general, it's a little bit more non-specific of a call to action, you know, unlike, say, Give Peace a Chance, which is very much like an anthem.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of makes only people a little bit more neutered, I think, of a political song.
Mhm.
However, I would also argue that its poppiness makes it more palatable and consumable for the average listener than something so in your face like Give Peace a Chance. I can see where Give Peace a Chance would have maybe been a little bit polarizing for when it came out.
You know what it reminded me of? This song
What?
reminded me of the I'd like to buy the world a Coke song, like the
Oh.
advertisement.
Yeah, the thing that Don Draper wrote. Spoiler
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
alert. Oh my God. Yeah, I could totally hear that. That's so funny. Maybe he was inspired. I know he watched a lot of TV. We know that.
That's true. That's true. And I think it had already come out by then, but that whole like hippie up with people sort of feel you just get, yeah, like a gentle peace message.
I totally get that. And, in the Evolution documentary too, it's cool to hear it go from the demo to the finished product because it has John sort of taking this as a song about a story about somebody named Billy, just a little tale, like they would tell in songs, in its Beatles days, to its final form, which, obviously becomes a little bit more political. But it's cool. Like, I'm not a songwriter. So anytime I can hear process of songwriting, it's really fascinating to me.
I wonder who Billy was.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was sort of a fill-in. Is it Billy Preston? We can make a whole bunch of like conspiracy theories about this.
Maybe because John didn't really like to do those mini vignette songs the way Paul did. Like he didn't like the Obladi Oblada like style of
The storytelling through.
yeah, Eleanor Rigby,
Yeah.
Another Day. Like he didn't like to do that. So I wonder if it's more like he took something from real life, like Brian Epstein Blues, really, like and he like riffed
there's
off
that.
that. Like if really is a real person behind the song in some way.
It could be. And also the way he plays it and sings it, I almost think it's maybe a little ditty that's been like rattling around in his head for a while, like maybe even like a decade, So,
Yeah.
the melody could have really evolved out of that he sort of just had this lying around.
And that's what's so fun about these boxes is that it makes you very curious because you hear so much of the process and the evolution.
Yeah, it is really fun. Next up is I Know, I Know. This is the song, Erica, that has a little bit of a Paul nod, depending on who you believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
You tell.
So this song got another glowing review from John, which he called it just a piece of nothing.
Jesus, John.
I know, what the fuck?
No wonder the album didn't do well if this is how you promote it.
I know. Well, to be fair, this is him reflecting on it in 1980, but still, like,
Okay.
Come on. Like, give yourself some credit. This stuff is way better than you think it is. So on one hand, on the surface level, it's just another sort of like I'm learning song from John to Yoko. But some also say that this song, or at least the title with I Know and then I Know in parentheses, is John writing a song to Paul in a response to Paul's song, Some People Never Know from Wildlife.
Oh,
So at least the repetition of the title.
they love that.
That's sort of a theory that's kicked around out there. So if you want to, bite onto it, go for it. But I don't know.
Kind of related to Paul, too. The opening line is essentially, I've got a feeling.
Oh, yeah. I could totally hear that.
And it's weird when I first heard it in Atmos, especially because it was really brought out. I was like, what is happening here? And then it morphs quickly into something that almost sounds like an Allman Brothers song or like some kind
Oh
of
my
like
God, that's so funny.
country folk sort of feel. But that one lick is so reminiscent of I've Got a Feeling.
That is so funny. That is true. I never even thought about that. Here, I really love the elemental mix of the song because I love John's double track vocal getting its spotlight. And the stripped down feel of that track particularly gives it more of a country feel. Those are kind of my favorite moments on this album are when John sort of leans a little bit country. And I know, he did it on his earlier albums a little bit, I'm thinking about like Crippled Inside and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But just hearing him do it with this band in particular is really rich,
So many layers here.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the next song, this is another one I could have sworn was late 70s until hearing it here on Mind Games. You Are Here.
Well, it has that sort of like, I mean, like John would say that he would call like sort of style of this as like a Latin-esque song in a ballad tradition. I definitely felt like the pedal steel gives it sort of an island feel. It's almost like Hawaiian.
Oh, totally Hawaiian feeling. Yeah.
So in that sense, I could totally hear how you would equate it to like Beautiful Boy or the beginning of just like starting over or even like watching the wheels. It kind of could fit into that, the later, John's later catalog.
Yeah. It's a very sweet song.
Yeah. No, it's great. And this is where we get the inspiration, I think, for those scavenger hunts, because this is, from Liverpool to Tokyo. And we get a lot more of these contrasting, comparing lines, one woman, one man, that kind of balancing act that John draws between him and Yoko. And Beatles fans will know the title was taken from an art exhibition that John held at the Robert Fraser Gallery in London in 1968, which was publicly dedicated to Yoko from John with love. And Yoko is obviously then just his girlfriend. But the phrase would show up a lot during John's life and his work. And it was very prominent also during his Sometime in New York City era that preceded this album.
I like the historical callback to the art exhibition here. I thought that was really interesting. And it isn't the first time in this album either, in that the song Mind Games has the line, "Yes is the answer," which I think calls back to the art exhibit that Yoko was presenting when John met her.
Yes. No pun intended. Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Here too, like we were saying earlier about another track, the Evolution doc has the starting out as sort of a minor key ominous feeling song, which is pretty much the opposite of where it ends up. It starts off with this minor key feel, and then it sort of resolves into a major when the "You Are Here" line would eventually turn up. So it resolves around there. But I read something that I thought was kind of interesting, where the roots of this song might stem from that White Album period. So that would be right around that exhibit time. And apparently, I've never heard the story. Apparently, Harry Nilsson visited John in the studio when the Beatles were recording the White Album. And they challenged each other to write a song with the same title. So they picked "You Are Here." So John sort of started to write this song. And then Harry wrote a song, but it didn't surface until very recently, I think, when they did the Harry Nilsson doc a few years ago.
Oh.
So yeah, so that's really cool. Like, it's a really neat backstory for this song.
That is interesting.
So apparently the Harry version is on the Nilsson Sessions box set, the 1968 to 1971. So you can hear his version of "You Are Here."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, if that really is the impetus for this song, then yeah, it probably was written quite a bit earlier, at least some form of it.
Right. His take is a bit more of a jazzy sort of swinging kind of tune to it.
Makes sense for him.
Yeah, it is very in that Nilsson sort of vein. I love this little song challenge they had for each other. That's really cute.
Yes, genius songwriters challenging each other to write more songs. Keep it coming.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah. And now we get to the end.
Yeah, the last track of Mind Games. That went by so fast. It was, time flies when you're having fun.
I know.
But we have Meat City. Does that title like gross you out?
Yes. And I know it's a reference to New York, but it grosses me out.
I know. Erica is a vegetarian, so it does not gross me out. It makes me want a steak, personally. But so the Meat City was the B-side of the Mind Games single. And, here we go. We get the Rocker John that we had on previous albums. It's got some gritty guitar riffs, some fun wordplay. Definitely a different vibe to a lot of the material on Mind Games. I would put this in the same vein as Free to People. And, it resolves the album with a really strong rocker that's also kind of a lot more nonsensical in contrast to the album's heavier themes.
This song was very like earlier John to me, all of those different elements.
Was this one of the ones that you would have placed in this time period if you heard it on Macca Radio?
No, I would have thought it was like 71.
Yeah, much earlier.
It's got like gritty, heavier singing style and heavier guitar. It feels even earlier, actually, like his Revolution era than anything else in Mind Games. But it did feel very right in context of a certain period of John's career.
For sure. And, obviously, like you say, Meat City is an allusion to New York City, and the musical style is sort of a boogie kind of thing. And it's meant to emulate the chaos of the city. And I think, a song, ironically, that it reminds me of is just John's song, New York City. It's sort of like the little brother, I think, of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, the outtake here is over double the length of the version included on the album or the Ultimate Mix. And John just sort of repeats his like finger licking chicken, but then he says motherfucker, which we love.
Get that explicit rating.
It earned the E on Spotify. It's a strong finisher for the album. I think it's great to hear John rock out a little bit, kind of get in touch with his roots. And it kind of, when it's thought of in the context of the entire album, it kind of makes you wonder what's next for him because it is so different than anything earlier on the album.
And it's interesting, too, that the next project he undertakes is the rock and roll album.
Yeah, when he goes out to LA and works with Phil Spector. So maybe the moments where he flashes back to his youth and, those moments of like the Elvis-y country, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, like kind of stuff really inspires him.
Yeah, yeah. So that's Mind Games.
Oh my gosh, Mind Games.
Any final thoughts on the album?
Oh, it's been such a really fun time. I gotta say, it's been so fun to go through the box and spend some really quality time with these recordings and really listening to it for the first time. I feel really lucky that this is my introduction to this album, and I really love it. It's become one of my favorite John albums.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And I think it was underrated, and it was underrated by John. So, John, you're your own worst critic. We all know this.
It was. I think that if Sean's objective was to invite people to reconsider the album, I think he's done it. And I hope that a lot of people do listen to it and they reconsider the value of this album. It's not mediocre at all. It's got a lot of brilliance in it, and of course, not just from John, but from the Plastic UFO No Band too.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, so I love it. Gotta keep listening to it.
Same here, same here.
Also from a, historical aspect, in that we get 6 different versions of the same songs. And that's so much fun to just nerd out on.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And they're all so different. So it's really nice. I think if I were to request one thing from this box, it would just be more outtakes, because I love a good outtake. And I love hearing the different takes of songs and that kind of thing. And I love studio chatter so much. So,
me too.
The Evolution documentary mixes were a lot of fun for that reason. But I definitely see where the Elements mix and the Elemental mix are really important. And like, a lot of the musicians said in the book, and like you were saying, Erica, it's like you listen to these different mixes and you hear stuff that you never heard, like the organ on Mind Games. Like, who the hell knew that was there? So they definitely bring a different perspective to the project. So nice to have those in the mix. No pun intended.
Another perspective on John's genius.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that was amazing. And if you can't get enough of Mind Games either, let us know in the comments or on our social media feeds. And don't forget to enter our giveaway for the chance to win your own Mind Games set at bcthebeatles.com. And thanks so much, as always, for listening to BC the Beatles. As always, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now, and give us a rating and review so other Beatlemaniacs can find us.
And yes, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter /X, and TikTok, and YouTube if you'd like. We'll be posting photos, videos, and more from this episode and beyond. And remember, you can always email us at bcthebeatles@gmail.com as well. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.